really sorry, but you can't.
It's not unfair.
You can't stand up. You've had 2 goes at me already this evening, and I'd just like the right to respond.
Yeah.
Traffic lights are nothing to do with the police. First point. There is an understood. No, you've got to let. You can't stand up and ask me a question in a public meeting and then shout up because you don't like the answer.
If it's a safety issue, it is.
I don't repair traffic lights. I'm a cop. Let's leave it there. The agenda for change is really well understood. The democratically elected government has decided that police budgets will be significantly reduced, thereby meaning we can't carry on as we are. Your point about back office is actually really well made, and I agree with you, which is why we've made several hundred staff members redundant, and we have the 4th leanest back office functions in British policing, and are highlighted as best practice by the Inspectorate. So we've already been there. Our first tranches of change did not touch any frontline police resources at all, because we took all the costs out of the back office. We have the leanest state costs, the leanest fleet costs, and the 4th leanest back office operation. And that's not me saying that, that's Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. So we've already been there, and that means now we haven't got lots of places to go. The costs of running cell blocks all across the force are now prohibitive. When I joined, everywhere had a cell block. It has to be run by a sergeant, and it really needs to be open 24/7, and it needs detention officers supporting it and medical support, because that's what the law requires. We've done lots of work on those costs. We've tested that against commercial values of contracts. We've looked at how we could do it. Should we outsource it? Should we not? We work with other forces. It's not impossible to take prisoners from here elsewhere. We still put 24,000 people through the cell blocks the other year, and the law's been changed. So actually for minor offences we can arrest on street bail. We can deal with people by appointment. Drugs, we do lots of drugs warrants in a year. If you've got intelligence and information around drugs, please pass it to us and we will act on it, because drugs are a driver of other criminality. There are 3 crimes a day reported in Rutland as an area. That is not a high crime area by any measure. And you're now going to say, well, these are just statistics. Well, they might be facts. But, you know, I agree with you. We should strip out the back office, and we have. We've made hundreds of people redundant. And, you know, we are policing. The 24,000 people who came through the cell block didn't do so on a self-surrender basis. The prisons are full. Recorded crime is halved. You're less likely to be a victim of crime now than you were a decade ago.
Well, I've only got one thing. That's the cutting your budget this year is cutting grant funding.
Yeah.
Well, grant funding is normally ring-fenced for a specific grant for a specific purpose, so you haven't taken a cut in your major budget.
No, we have. It's not. The grant is the central grant that comes from the government, and they've removed all of the ring fences within it.
Correct.
So it used to come. It used to come.
Lost the ring-fence grant.
The ring fencing has gone. So the money used to come, and it used to say this amount will have to be spent on PCSOs. Now it's saying you just get this amount.
Correct.
Which I would say, by the way, if I may say, is a great strength. At least we can now make local decisions within the reality of that budget, rather than having to spend it on areas where perhaps it wouldn't suit us to do so. But, so for example, as Chief has mentioned, the PCSOs aspect of it. Actually, even though we no longer are mandated, as we were before, to spend that budget on the 223 PCSOs, not only have we maintained it, but have actually added to it as well, because that's the right thing to do in terms of local neighbourhood policing.
I'll move to say the neck. I'm just checking to see if I'm the only person from Uppingham. Oh, that's good. I'll speak for the town. That's good. 2 things really. One a statement and the other a question about an important area. I hear what some of the audience are saying. I'd like to reassure the Chief Constable that in Uppingham it's a pretty happy place. We have 2 issues at the moment. It's not an ideal world. I've got a problem with a pub that tells people at 2 o'clock in the morning, which the community is trying to collect data on. And my problem is with people driving too slow, ironically, not fast in certain parts. I'll explain that later. It's not about speed. Although I recognise, colleagues, it is a huge issue, speed in the villages. My question's in this area. Uppingham's doing a lot of work to try and take, shall we say, more accountability for itself. And it's talking to the county council, for example, about taking over parking and so on, if that's possible, to a service level agreement. And it is a fact that one of the reasons Uppingham High Street is a happy place on the whole is that we have had this very warm relationship with our PCOs and our officers. Now with interest, LPU commander's been down twice, A, to talk to business, secondly to talk to community. But we invited her, so perhaps that's the plan, you should invite her in. And, you know, we've had quite a lot of dialogue about what's going on. The dialogue we're having with the county council is under the government's localism bill. This suggestion that we should move more towards, you know, us not just demanding more from you without actually having a bit more say in what it is that we do and also perhaps what we give. So my concern at the moment is what we'd like to do is have some sort of dialogue with the force, and the PCC is coming down soon, about the possibility of Uppingham putting more into the pot. We think it's important, community safety is important, and at the moment the system has always been, you will ask us for what you can, you never have enough, and occasionally we've given more, and then you decide, professionally, how that money is allocated. The debate we'd like to have is a little bit, and it's a touch of Dixon of Dock Green, because that was about having somebody in the community who knew the community, which is what the neighbourhood team have been up to now. And we recognise where the world's going and the budget's going, we ain't going to have that completely. So the sort of dialogue we'd like, and really I'm interested in whether they're interested in having the dialogue is, we'd like to have a discussion about how we might put more into the pot, but have a little bit of a say in how that works. And that's generally the way localism's going. So I'll be interested if the Chief Constable has a view about that, accepting some policy and some operational.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I must say, Dixon, of course, got shot by an organised crime group, didn't he? Which sort of gets forgotten. I really welcome that. You know, we have those kind of relationships elsewhere in the force area. Some of the universities contribute to have dedicated resources on their area. Typically, they fund a part or whole of a PCSO or two. And that's a relationship, you know, using an example which sounds quite similar. You know, the deal would be that if the world ended somewhere else, they might not be stood in Uppingham that day. You know, there's huge things we would need to move them away, but the experience of others who have that kind of relationship with us would be, that's probably never happened, or it's happened once or twice. So the huge demonstrations in the city where we've had to bring people from all over the country, perhaps happened a couple of times, but it is a commercial relationship and we have it, and I've worked in other forces as well where that's happened, and you know, it is a potential way forward. And of course you may, until a couple of years ago, Leicestershire County Council, did I mention them in here?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I've got my fingers crossed now. But
If you can wash your mouth out.
yeah, Leicestershire County Council used to pay £500,000 a year to us towards the cost of PCSOs within Leicestershire, and the terms of that relationship was a contractual one, which meant we still had primacy. We had a service level agreement in effect about where they would be, but if the world ended, I had the right to pull them off somewhere else as long as I explained why I was doing it. So we've already done that kind of stuff.
So the possibility of a service level agreement with the town to use that, your words is a possibility?
It's absolutely
okay.
An option.
Okay, please do that. Thank you.
Right, last three questions. One, going once, going twice.
have a second bite.
Crouch from Langham, I would like to say that despite your problems, thank you for looking after us and keeping us safe and sound.
Thank you.
A very simple comment.
I can't see right at the back in case there are some right at the back who are trying to indicate, but if not, this is the last question.
It's a comment as much as a question. I think Oakham was the worst place 20 odd years ago when I first came here. There was serious fighting in the streets. We had local police, they dealt with it more or less. Everything changes, nothing stays the same in that sense, but the wheel turns. You know. The issues now, I don't think are that serious against the context of the nation, Leicestershire or downtown Leicester. But they're real for us.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And the message I hear from everybody speaking is, are you hearing us?
Yeah.
And are you with us? Are you present with us? Because that's what we need from the police. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be total. It has to be good enough. God knows that's hard enough.
Yeah.
Good enough is good enough. So what we're beginning to say to you underneath it all is we're worried it might not be good enough. And that's to do with resources, because we're changing things. That doesn't make anxiety. But it's also to do with the fact that the processes are so goddamn slow that people's heads don't get round the problem from our point of view, and that we're dealing with strange little changes, or the bureaucrats in the office here, in the council, or your offices change, and so it's difficult. But we appreciate the effort.
Well, that's fine. I mean, the answer to your question, the first slide that went up said Leicestershire Police protecting local communities. The local communities are massively diverse. I can go from the city to here. The gentleman from Braunston made the point Braunston without the E. You know, one of my favourite slides, and I haven't used it tonight, is life expectancy and relevant experience of life in those two places, which are within a dozen miles of each other, and turn up some really interesting figures. So we get the fact that we have to deliver in different communities. I was on call over the weekend. I covered everything from nightclub violence through to rural crime, counter-terrorism, and I go back to something that I said, and I'm not sure which of the meetings I said it in. Radio Leicester this morning said to me, what's terrorism got to do with Rutland? Well, actually, if your fertiliser isn't secure, and it turns up in a bomb somewhere, you know, this is a whole systems thing. We're absolutely with you. That's why we're putting a new building in here. That's why we're going to have dedicated neighbourhood resources here, because we need to understand what concerns locally. And the point you've made, I'd probably finish on. It might be relatively different to the experience of somebody else, but it's happening in your life. And we talk all the time about assessing individuals and dealing with individuals, because I might react to something differently to you, or to you, or to you. So it's about understanding the impact on an individual, being able to provide support to that individual, being able to deal with offenders if they're offenders. And I, you know, absolutely, I get that, and I think we get that. We don't always get it right, but we're prepared to kind of work on issues and things. And your comment about how it's changed in your time here is really interesting.
Last question.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a question of a topical interest. The Home Secretary is saying that the greatest problem facing this country is internal security with terrorist activity. And today it's been announced that the police are going to be given more powers to deal with this.
Yeah.
Be interesting to know just how that will apply, because obviously there'll be a huge training requirement, additional resources required, and I just wonder what Leicestershire has in mind for it.
I've done 8 media interviews today about counter-terrorism, and I've got a face for radio apparently, so that's where I advise the kids to go. You know, there are a set of things that are happening in terrorism that have changed fundamentally. When I was a PC walking the beat, and I think I've already said it, terrorism was an Irish fellow who phoned up, gave you a code word that he previously agreed with you, and said there's a package and it's going to go off in 3 hours. That isn't how terrorism is now. My personal belief, and I think it's really important that it goes through a democratic process, because I'm a cop. I don't know this, or you know, I do my banking online, I book my holiday online. Guess what? Terrorists who used to have to meet up and plan, or send each other letters in code, they're doing it online. We need to know what that says, because it's literally life and death. You'll have seen the recent arrests of people for alleged plots. There's media here, alleged plots. You'll have noticed there was quite a long time from the announcement of arrests to announcement of charges. That's because the information's there about what it is alleged they intend to do, and there then has to be a search for evidence, a lot of which is around IT. So the IT bit, it needs to be controlled. Maybe it only needs to be on the authority of the judge. I don't know what controls. We don't look at everybody's emails and messages, but we need to look at some people. So I'd say that. The other thing that's going on from the East Midlands region, we know there are a number of people amongst the 500 Britons who are fighting abroad on both sides of what's going on in Syria, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. So some of them we might agree with their cause, not their methods, and some of them we might not agree with either their methods or their cause. What are we going to do with them when they start coming back? Do we want to stop them coming back? When they come back, do we deal with them as an offender? Well, we don't know what's the evidence package, or do we deal with them as somebody who needs rehabilitation? In terms of our response, our special branch function is a shared anti-terrorist command with all the forces in the East Midlands. We all share a proportion of those costs. We have a branch in each force area. We have the PREVENT scheme, which is the counter-terrorist education scheme to try and divert people from radicalisation. And I would say in my time here as chief, there are two really stark incidents for me. One is Al-Qaeda make a bomb in the Yemen. They put it in a photocopier. They put the photocopier onto a commercial trade flight. It's addressed to a synagogue in Chicago, and it's timed to go off there at the time they've agreed delivery with a well-known international delivery company. It lands at East Midlands Airport at 1 o'clock in the morning, which is where it's decided it's a bomb. That was an interesting set of days. Loughborough, teenage lad at the college, white lad, influenced on the internet by the massacres in America at schools. We knew nothing about him. Education knew nothing about him, really. We came across him and locked him up for public order, causing the kind of nuisance actually that we've heard described this evening. And the cops just thought there was something that they didn't think was right. And really unusually for a public order prisoner, we searched his house. And in his house we found bomb-making kit. And his intention was to replicate the school massacres in America. He had made explosives, he had got footage of those, he had a colour-coded list of who he wanted to kill, which started off with his school teachers. And every so often I get to speak to education gatherings, and that is a line that attracts their attention. The link to local communities, the trust to tell us about those kind of things is fundamental. Because actually we can't beat terrorism on our own, we can only do it if the whole community, and I would say that includes this community. Because this community has fertiliser and things that could be turned into. There may be a kid at college, you know, if it can happen in Loughborough, why can't it happen here? You know, the internet gives, it's a wonderful thing, it's an empowering and liberating thing. It also brings some threats and risks with it. So our response is within the national strategy, 5-force shared command. I think we do need to understand what legislation is reasonable in a democratic society to look at private correspondence between people. I have a view, but then I would, because I'm the person who's trying to stop them killing people. And it seems to me fairly disproportionate to be overly worried that they might read the fact that I've emailed my mum about a chocolate cake recipe because we're doing the Great British Bake Off for pops, rather than a terrorist plot.
Stood half a step back, and it's this, that when governments pass legislation that enable police to do more things, or indeed another good example was a couple of weeks ago, correct me if I get this wrong, Simon, when Leicester City make not just a few no drinking zones, but actually making it a no drinking city. My concern, I voiced this to the chief when this was being mooted, it's all very well, but you can't do these extra things without something else changing somewhere else. So when either a local city council or a local county council or indeed the government decides that the police can and should do more things, they have not only to will the ends, but they also have to will the means. And we've talked a lot tonight about resourcing, and this is the sort of thing that comes up in starkly when these sort of extra powers are given. Because actually there's a worry. You could set the police up to fail. If you say we want you to do this, but we're not going to give you anything extra to do it with, then it means the chief has got some very difficult choices.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to know what outside people think, HMIC, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, is issuing a report on their Ofsted equivalent for the police in Leicestershire on Thursday. If you have found this evening so wonderful that you want to come back on Thursday evening, we have a scrutiny meeting, which is a meeting in public, not a public meeting, where we have the Chief Fire Officer, who will be trying to explain to us why he is making various proposals for consideration about our fire service. Can I thank you very much indeed for the way that you have asked your questions this evening, and can we thank Sir Clive and Simon?
Thanks very much.